Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Miriam, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good morning, Pete. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for making time. You are one of those lovely wandering heroes that I met. So for context for people, we sat down outside a lovely little pub, get together, and then we were in a group of friends, and then we started talking, and maybe an hour and a half later we realized everybody else had got up they'd gone and sat somewhere else. So you and I were like, but with the greatest respect, I loved it, and that's a great representation of how much we connected on and we'd never met each other prior to that
That's
time.
true.
It was actually in the Women in the Fire Service event that was this year. But for people that are completely unfamiliar with you and haven't had the pleasure for sitting with an hour and a half, could you start by giving us some context around, because you're a very experienced public sector worker, training director, lots of a myriad of landscape of experience. Give us a whistle-stop tour of kind of how you first got into the first responder sector and kind of the work you're doing and you're involved in at the moment.
It's very flattering, Pete, for you to talk about me as having a myriad of things, but thank you. My background, I'm a people professional. I work in all things people. So qualifications-wise, I've got a master's degree in HR management. I'm a chartered fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. My background is very much organisational development. I'm a qualified trainer. I have worked in that industry and sector for too many years to mention, and I'd have to give up my. I'd have to share my age, which I don't want to do.
What initially drew you to that sector?
So I've always been interactive with people. That's always been my kind of drive. It's just I just love being around people. I love talking to people. I love spending time with people. I love learning about people. It's just a kind of integral part of my personality, I think. And I fell into HR as a young woman because it fitted around my children, who were very young at the time, and found that I just absolutely loved it. I've worked in the private sector. I've worked in the NHS primarily for 15 years.
Wow.
And then I've been in the fire sector for around about 7 or 8 years now, working in and with a number of different fire and rescue services, working with some of the other national organisations. I've done quite a bit of work with the NFCC. I've also been part of the Women in the Fire Service UK. I'm now one of their directors and their company secretary. I'm one of the extended leaders group for the Asian Fire Services Association, and I'm the national lead now for neurodiversity and disability in the NFCC. So fire got its hooks into me, and I can't get away from it for some reason.
Well, I think that probably shines a light on how much we are, with the greatest respect to everybody, sort of wandering in the dark, trying to find solutions to some very age-old problems that have been plaguing the sector for quite some time. I wanted to ask you a little bit of a pivot question as a nice maybe jump off. Certain sectors, we always used to refer to your side of organizations as HR, human resources. And then there was a shift to the realization that, people are people, as you sort of alluded to. And there's something around the emergency services as a whole, perhaps, that we're very management driven, resource driven, treating people like assets sometimes. Could you please shine some light onto that aspect of how we made that shift and why it's so important to think about people differently than just a number or an asset or a resource?
If I'm honest, Pete, I don't think we have yet made that shift. I think we're talking about that shift, but I don't think we've made it in terms of our day-to-day interactions in the sector. So human resources as a department in the sector has been treated very much as an administrative resource. And there is a huge amount in human resources that is administrative. And in the sector, that's been kept very separate from things like training, organisational development, equality and inclusion. We create this concept of subject matter experts and keep people in their boxes. The reality is it's professional people skills. That's what's required. And that sometimes I think is at odds with a culture of this word discipline, which is very, very important. So I'm not suggesting that it's not. But we sometimes keep that as a kind of separate thing. And instead of kind of thinking, how do we get the best from people, both in terms of in a fireground situation, in a command situation, but also in all the other aspects of work that fire and rescue services do. And I think that whole concept of keeping different professions inside their own little compartments and getting them to do tasks is one of the things that holds us back as a sector.
I absolutely agree. There's a weird thing around siloing that we've historically been very deep, and it's something we spoke about before we came on the podcast. There's something quite unique about first responder community specifically. I think maybe more police and fire, definitely, because we are considered to be more disciplined organizations and we're very much operationally driven. We think of our why as putting out fires and rescuing people. Some people think of that as our why because that's what we write on everything. So that very much helps us and justifies our lean in towards the more operational management style approach.
And every organization will have a product of some kind, and that product will either be an object or it'll be a service that you deliver. So every single sector will have that product, which is language that I think is kind of a bit of anathema to our sorts of organizations. Our product, our reason for existing is to rescue people, to protect them, to prevent emergency incidents if possible. And everything that every person in any organization should be doing should be connected in some way, even if that's kind of one step removed, should be connected into delivering that product. So again, I'm not suggesting at all that focus on operational delivery isn't both essential and necessary, because that's why the organizations exist. But if you then take the same thinking and approach to how you deliver the front end of the organization to all the other aspects of running multi-million pound organizations, then you're not going to get the right kind of outcomes.
No.
So the reality is that those kind of enabling services, those things that do other things, need to be run in different ways to how you run the frontline elements. So the idea of discipline, actually what we mean is somebody with a command background making all of the decisions. That's what we actually mean when we talk about discipline in organizational terms, not in terms of frontline behaviors. And I think we confuse those aspects a lot of the time. It's so key that we start to value absolutely everybody for their contributions, their professional skills, their knowledge. And by value, I mean genuinely hear, genuinely listen to, genuinely engage with, not pay lip service, not do a list of tasks where you tick a box, but actually to genuinely value the contributions of those people and to have that integrated into your very structure and fabric of the way an organization works. That does not remove discipline. And I think that's where the challenge has come in, is there's a perception that if you do things differently, you will somehow remove discipline. And that's not true.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line. working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. I think also we're not empowering people in the same way to make decisions as that subject matter expert. Almost there's a hypocrisy in the reason why we employ certain experts within organizations. And you've identified it so well there. And it's almost sits so much within our blueprint and in our vernacular, even when we look at Green Book, Grey Book and things like that. The people that often tend to sit at the top of these organizations like fire and rescue services, more often than not, before the time of direct entry, and we're seeing some great variations in the way that that model is applied at the moment, but they tend to have been someone from a command background, and they don't give the autonomy and the freedom for the people that they hire in who are true subject matter experts. It's a bit like, we're trying to run multi-million-pound organizations as knuckle-dragging firefighters sometimes, and that's very disrespectful and offensive to some of the wonderful fire officers we've got. But what I mean is, when you get to that point in the organization, you have to recognize that you don't have an expertise in HR. You don't have an expertise in accountancy. You don't know anything about IT. You can fumble around Word and Excel. That's about it. That's why you hire an expert in IT to design, purchase, and implement those aspects. But we don't seem to have made that full shift yet when it comes to recognized neurodiversity, leadership development, human resources, and aspects like that.
I absolutely agree with you. There is not a chief executive in any organization from any sector in the world that is an expert in everything that their organization does. No. They're accountable, but they don't necessarily always have to be the decision maker. And that's the difference between command and leadership, in my view. And both are necessary in a disciplined organization. And I think that's where we have a little bit of a gap. And it's the definition of madness, isn't it, Pete? Keep doing the same things and expect a different outcome. We can create more and more action plans over decades and decades and decades, but we're not seeing real change. So unless we actually start to hear and get rid of or challenge or at the very least debate some of those things that are kind of sacred cows within
I love that.
within our structures and the way that we work, then we're not going to move on. We are just not going to move on. And I think one of the differences in the sector is as soon as you start to have those conversations about those things that people really hold dear, in terms of command, even if you kind of start to open the debate, to have the conversation, people get very cross and very defensive. Now that's human, but I've never seen it to the same extent as you see it in fire. That kind of cultural defensiveness, and this is not about individuals. This is about us as a culture together. That people from all different backgrounds in the sector will defend the current position. In reality, they might say, we need to change, we want to do things differently, here's an action plan to get us to change. But as soon as you start to say, yeah, but what about that? What about that? That might be a blocker. Could we maybe have a debate about that? People immediately get very cross and the debate gets shut down.
I think the concern is that you're going to start disassembling someone's identity, because of course I would say this, I sit within my own bias in a silo, but firefighters tend to be mostly, hopefully, and I think they should be very proud of their job. And it's a very much a cultural identity. They are like a moral compass. It stands for something, like even just in society and community. A firefighter is an identity. And that's why I loved our conversation so much, because I always think of the hypocrisy of me having conversations like this. I am a 6'5", muscle bound, white, knuckle dragging, firefighting male. I am the goddamn stereotype. Do you know what I mean? But it's like when we start to attempt to even deconstruct some of the sacred cows, as you so beautifully put it, it's not a threat to that person's identity. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not saying everything you stand for is toxic and wrong. It's saying maybe we should start to reconsider the application of some of these theories and some of these long-held beliefs. That I remember reading a quote the other day: any idiot can come up with a new idea, but it takes true leaders to stop doing something old. And some of the things that we still do really do a lot of damage in the sphere that we currently operate in.
I totally agree with you. And I would say two things to what you've just said. The very first thing is that it's absolutely right and proper that firefighters are proud of what they do and who they are. And I am proud to work with firefighters and alongside firefighters. So none of this conversation is about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's how it's often perceived, and I think that's an important point. So that stifles debate and discussion, genuine, open debate and discussion. The second point I would make, most importantly, is you are very tall and muscle bound and all of those things, but you're not a knuckle dragger. I just have to challenge that. You are definitely not a knuckle dragger. You are very cerebral in your thinking, and it's refreshing to see. So I think that's important as well, that we don't actually jump to the biases and the stereotypes. But that goes all ways. So firefighters being proud of what they do is right and proper, but that does not necessarily mean that other people within the organisation are not contributing to that outcome. And actually, if you do increase the value and respect and decision-making power of other professions, it releases firefighters and commanders to do what their profession is, to do what they're proud of. But we could all work together and make decisions jointly when we're not in a fireground situation. We don't need to translate that life-saving need to do things quickly and importantly without challenge into all of the environment in terms of running an organisation, because it's a different skill set.
I think you make a great point there around the fact that we've been virtue signaling a lot of this stuff for a lot of time now, and we've kind of buried our head in the sand. But you're right. We need to have structures in place to actually have tools and resources and support and policies written in the correct manner to actually support our frontline leaders, because this stuff is happening already. This is always the irony of it that always frustrates me, is that whenever you see just in an operational world, like a strategic change, or people talk about the challenges of water rescue, but we're waiting to hopefully do the right thing. We're petrified of doing the wrong thing, and we do nothing. And actually on the front line, this stuff's happening day in, day out. And I think about it very much in the training department when I see lots of new recruits coming into the services, because they are being faced with people with genuine recognized neurodiversities. We have a different sort of generation of people coming into the fire and rescue services now, and we're not giving our leaders the resources, the support, the awareness, the education around how to best help these individuals enjoy a fulfilling career in the fire and rescue service. And we're doing so much unseen. That, well, I say unseen, it's like we've been thrown in a landfill, but now all of this muck has started to sprout up out of the ground, and we've seen it in the cultural reviews. And it's a bit like we're reaching a precipice where we're already behind the curve, but we're almost at crisis point where if we don't do it, all the money we're investing in recruiting new people, they're going to have such short careers and high churn because we've not got the structure in place to treat them properly. That's right.
And those people with different skill sets that can actually bring that challenge into the organisation, unless the outcomes are given immediately, and I've seen this in more than one service, in fact, numerous services, unless the outcomes of some of that shift and change are not seen immediately, it's just abandoned and it's moved on to the next thing. Well, cultural change doesn't happen overnight. You can't order somebody to change. That's not the way human beings function.
Yeah.
You have to give time for these things to bed in. And you have to wait for the results and the outcomes, and you have to be prepared to hear people and listen to their worries and their concerns about loss of identity and all of those sorts of things. But that goes across everybody who works in an organisation, not just not just one set or two sets or three sets of people. You know, it beggars belief for me. It just defies logic that we wouldn't actually consider that people who train for a really, really, really long time in their own given profession wouldn't be the best people to make the decisions about those things. As a wheelchair using, neurodiverse, very small, slightly overweight woman, you know, I would not go wading into a fireground and throw on BA and start trying to run around, wheeling around a fireground. So because that's not my profession, it's not what I do. But I would have, as an objective person outside of that, opinions that I might want to give in a setting where you don't have to do things very quickly. So why is my profession and the professions of other people within the sector not, and I'm not going to use the word valued, because we throw that around, and actually what that is interpreted as is somebody's nice to me, or somebody's kind, or somebody doesn't pick on me, or somebody.
It's almost being polite, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's almost slightly condescending as well, really.
Absolutely. So it's not just about that kind of the terminology we use in this professional setting of valued, but really, really, really heard, really understood, really respected. You know, so that when you make decisions that somebody who's from a different profession might not understand, that actually they still respect that that's necessary. And by different profession, I'm talking about, you know, operational commanders quite often, in the same way as I wouldn't kind of say, you know, that I know to cut somebody out of a car or put a fire out. I've not had that training, but I have got substantial experience and training in how organizations work and how culture can shift, and how some of those things that we find really hard to let go of are actually the very things that are driving some of this.
Yeah.
You know, I've had conversations with crews all over the country where when you actually sit down and speak in a kind of open way and be prepared to hear and engage, but also challenge and share your own positions and views on an equal footing, then you actually come across some of the most intelligent, empathic, genuine people that you would want to meet anywhere. So actually these cultural biases that are really deeply ingrained are not because individual firefighters are sexist or racist or homophobic.
Yeah.
Some might be, because there's a proportion of that in every group of people.
Of course.
But it's not that that's driving our cultural restrictions. They're the outputs. They're the awful outputs, but they are the outputs. It's the lack of ability to challenge in a constructive way, to have open debates, to be able to kind of respect each other's professional knowledge to the extent where you're actually given decision-making power, but that for everybody to think systemically and to think about us as a, that whole thing about fire family, the community thing, the being a family of people who work together, you know, that extends to everybody who works in a fire service. So why can't we extend that in terms of actual decision-making power in a fire service? Because that's what would make the difference.
I think places where we're seeing this start to be recognized most, and again, falling back into my own bias, in the training and development world that I work within, there really has been quite a healthy shift. I remember speaking to Candice Miller, head of Skills for Jobs, recently, and this recognition that we live in adult education realistically when we are in any professional sector helping somebody onboard an initial acquisition of skills. You have to, in order to support that person in their best, set them up for success, for want of a better description, you have to recognize that you are within adult education and you have a desire to bring in subject matter experts, we've had teachers, we've had other trainers from other organizations, come and visit us and spend time with us. And it's been a mutual thing. We've reached to them and they've reached to us, because whilst they may not know the subject, they know people. They know how to get things across. They know how to ignite.
Stuff.
Yeah, they help people encode, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you're right about your own biases, because we all have them. But the training world, the learning and development world, actually, we're the people who come into contact with the vast majority of people.
Yeah, you have that touch point with all of the organisations, don't you?
Because you see them. You're the kind of cultural compass.
Today's podcast is powered by our partner Lifelines and their revolutionary approach to functional hydration. Just like in firefighting, water is essential for body function, but studies show more than 80% of firefighters are dehydrated. A 25-year study findings from the National Institute of Health showed poor hydration to be linked to early aging and chronic disease, and even mild dehydration results in significant negative impact outcomes, including headaches, exhaustion, rapid pulse, irritability, and poor cognitive function. A study conducted by Yale University showed that participants who were just 1% dehydrated had a 12% increase in errors when performing tasks that required cognitive flexibility. In addition, dehydration is shown to worsen mood and attitude, contribute to confusion and poor decision making, and negatively affect memory and judgment. In other words, you really don't want your incident commander, firefighter, or for that matter any first responder on a critical scene to be even slightly dehydrated. Mild dehydration occurs when a person is just 1.5% dehydrated, a condition that does not even trigger the thirst response in most people. So just imagine how quickly a firefighter or any first responder can and does become dehydrated in their day-to-day duties, which is why I address my hydration first thing every day with Lifelines. Go into the notes for this episode and specifically check out Lifelines Hydro Fuel and Hydro OG by clicking in the notes for the podcast for a clean energy solution designed for those who demand more from their day. Now back to the show.
I don't like to use the word training, if I'm honest, because training for me is an output. Training for me is a course. Training for me is something that somebody does to you, and it's necessary. Training is necessary, but it's much broader than that. It's about learning. It's about learning everything. So when you do an operational training course, it's pointless if the people who are on that course aren't learning.
Yeah.
So but there are other ways that people can learn as well. So I would always look at in that broader sense. But we are that cultural touch point. We are that compass, if you like, of the way that people will learn. And our traditional approach is that we connect back to this word discipline of if we continue doing things, yes, people will learn if you train in a particular way or shout at them a lot or insist that they call you sir. Some people will learn and some people will fall by the wayside. Now, traditionally, what we've thought, the way that we've approached that is, well, if you fall by the wayside, that means you weren't good enough. When actually that isn't the case. That is not the case. That's why we have ended up in a situation where we are not diverse in our thinking. Because those people who might learn in a different way have fallen by the wayside over decades and decades. And yet again, you don't see that. You don't see that in sectors outside of uniform services, if I'm honest. No. So I used to work in the NHS. So this whole idea of we save lives, therefore it needs discipline. I used to work in the NHS. And I did a stint in supporting operating theatre team.
Wow.
And when you think about what happens in an operating theatre, what needs to happen, you get far more deaths than you do in uniform services.
Yeah, some more opportunities to cause death as well.
Absolutely. People die every single day in operating theatres. And yes, you might have some surgeons that might have a bit of a commanding approach, but the vast majority of professions in that room won't have that. And it's a multidisciplinary team. So you will have a nurse, you will have an operating theatre
You have an
technician,
anaesthetist. Yeah.
you'll have an anaesthetist, you'll have a porter, you'll have the cleaner, you'll have all of those people that without their individual skills, and they will all have learned those in different ways, that person would die.
Mm. I always love the analogy of getting the rocket to the moon. Do you ever hear that one where they were taking a tour of NASA and they see the guy sweeping the deck that
I
people
do? I
walk
put
on?
someone on the moon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
put people on the moon, because if I don't do
absolutely.
this, any kind of virus gets into there.
In that theatres environment, if you think about the clinicians, just the clinicians whose skills are all key during that operation, during that piece of surgery, they would not tell each other. They would overrule each other when it was necessary, because they would have different skills. And yes, you would have one person in charge, which is normally the surgeon. But then if somebody's sats fall because of the anaesthetic, the surgeon will capitulate to the anaesthetist, because the anaesthetist is the person with the skill set.
Yeah.
But they're both doctors.
Mm.
So that genuine multidisciplinary thinking, do people think that in an operating theatre people don't have to be disciplined?
Mm.
Of course they do. Of course they do. And people are more likely to die in that sort of setting. But yet there isn't this same concept of, but the only person who could make a decision about what would happen in an operating theatre is the chief.
Mm.
No. No.
Well, there used to be. I mean, I probably bore people ad nauseum with this, but you ever heard the story of Elaine Bromley?
No.
So
No, you've got a new victim to talk about it.
Oh yeah. So the story of Elaine Bromley, we had her husband, Martin Bromley, on the podcast. Elaine, unfortunately, died in an operating theatre. Well, she died in an intensive care unit, but she went in for a standard operation. It was only supposed to take a couple of hours. And Martin and his two daughters, or his two children, sorry, son and daughter, dropped her off in the morning, have a routine surgery to do with her breathing, just to help her sleep a bit better. Then we're going to go and pick her back up in the evening. And they put Elaine under, so she had her anesthetic, but they couldn't intubate her very well. They were struggling to get her breathing tube down, and several doctors came into the room, tried different approaches, tried getting different pieces of kit, and there was nurses standing around with an emergency tracheotomy kit, but didn't have the freedom, the trust, the assertiveness, or even just the professional respect to be able to step in. And she went something like 23 minutes without oxygen and sustained unsurvivable brain damage, and they switched her life support off shortly after. But Martin flies the Airbuses out of a very large airport in the UK, and he still does that now. And he requested an investigation, not because no one that was in the air got sacked. He didn't want anybody getting sacked, but he wanted people to learn from it, because he said in aviation, we have these meetings all the time. We do these investigations every single time. Not even if somebody doesn't die.
Brilliant for this stuff. Aviation are absolutely brilliant for this stuff.
And he was the birth of this human factors training, where you would have autonomy in your own professional discipline to be able to raise your hand and give objection. Because it was in a beginning of a book called Black Box Thinking, if you've ever heard that. It's Matthew Cert. Yeah. So Martin's in the beginning of that book, and this is the example they give, because a number of flights that have gone down where you can hear in the black box recording someone saying, Captain, we're running out of fuel, and the captain's just ignoring them, because they're so task focused. But anyway, I went down a rabbit hole there. But
no, you didn't. You didn't.
Aviation have learned from that.
Absolute right analogy.
NHS have learned from that. We are still further behind in that cultural maturity journey, if I'm describing it properly.
And that comes back to the sacred cows. That comes back to I've sat and had very long, detailed conversations with individuals that are similar to this, where we've thought about those things, and then as soon as you try and translate that into so why would a recruit have to call you sir in a classroom situation? Oh no, we can't stop that. That would
kill people, Miriam.
That will kill people. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. We've just spent the last hour and a half or 2 hours or however long I've spent with that person talking about all of the stuff you and I have just been discussing. but then that translation into a different setting just seems impossible for some people. And that I think is to do with the lack of demographic diversity within fire services. So I don't like the word institutionalized. It's got very negative connotations.
Definitely.
But it is used, and it is a good descriptor in this sort of thing. Is that if you have a big bulk of your people that are only from one professional background, it almost doesn't matter which one, and are all from one demographic, you will get an absolute kind of echo chamber. That's what you'll get, and that's what we've got. So until we start to kind of think differently about some of those things around actually translating some of this stuff into day-to-day action, not putting it on a list of things that we do, not putting it in a strategy and then ignoring it, but actually reaching in and reaching out and putting people from different backgrounds in different environments, but still respecting. So another example is the direct entry program. When you look at every time direct entry is mentioned, not just the current kind of rollout of it, but previous iterations that have been done in different ways. As soon as you mention it, people get very kind of what's the word?
Concerned.
Defensive.
Fearful,
is that the right word?
defensive. Yeah.
Yeah, but not always in an inappropriate way. Not always. I'm not suggesting that people get some people get very cross, and I mean, you get, as soon as you put it anywhere on social media, for example, you get streams of comments from people saying people will die, and I'll wait to see what happens here, and how are they gonna know if you've never worn BA? How can you know how to send somebody into a building wearing BA? Okay, well, maybe they've got a different skill that would enable them to see that better.
Well, they have, but also the way in which direct entry is applied in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, that person isn't really, if you excuse the pun, they're not really close enough to the fire to be able to give a direct instruction that would place a firefighter in direct harm. There are those lower level individuals, such as me as a watch commander, who would be that funnel or that filter, to be able to interpret that strategic.
That's right.
Given by
but
that
think
direct
about the
entry.
language you just used, Pete. You even used the words then, lower level.
Yeah.
Why did you use that? Why did you say lower level?
I suppose I flip between constantly, and there's an irony in it, because I often, part of the presentation that I give to inductions in fire and rescue services, I give this analogy of a tree versus a pyramid, whereby the most organizational org charts, you look at them and it looks like a pyramid, but actually if you try and dig deeper into it, what's the role of the principal officers? It's actually they need to pull in resources, pull in funding, pull in skill sets to feed the larger organization and support them. So I flip it up and look at it like a tree and say, look, we are the leaves, we're the firefighters that they're on the ground getting hit by the weather, getting hit by the challenges on the front line. But we sit above people that provide us with that support. But you're absolutely right. It's stuck in my vernacular at times when I think of
which is an example of what I was talking about just a minute ago about institutionalization. In that we all do it. We all do it within our own professions, within our own sectors. We get stuck into the norm of the language and the norm of the approach. And even when you have a different way of thinking, we'll still kind of capitulate to the status quo in terms of our own thinking and what we do.
Well, that's one of my biggest frustrations when we talk about diversity of thought, because we've kind of tiptoed around it a little bit, and you've gone in and unfolded a few layers of it for us. But I wonder if we could go there for a minute, because when I think of the different levels of leadership, as some of the old books describe levels of leadership, I think of that in levels of like awareness and maturity for us, because I feel like we're at level 1 in diversity, when we actually want people that just look the same, look differently but think the same. Whereas I
Absolutely.
articulated earlier about myself, I look like the stereotypical firefighter, but I don't see
Yeah,
anybody, and I'm no better than anybody else, but I don't see anybody else stupid enough or brave enough or a combination of the two to be going out there creating things like the Firefighters Podcast, because it's an entirely different way
absolutely.
of trying to build a lever to try and help with this cultural shift. But I don't think we recognize that in the way
Absolutely. I
that we
totally
like to
agree.
say we do.
I totally agree. So quite a lot of when we start talking about equality, diversity, and inclusion, and we shorten it to EDI, and it's become a bit of a toxic brand, hasn't it, in the fire
Yeah,
sector?
it's
Because
not it's
and,
not
and the
been
reason
sold
it's
very
become
well in some places.
no, it's not. And one of the reasons it's been a toxic brand is because we've approached it like we approach everything, and we've done a task list and an action plan, and we've given people orders about how they should think and what they should do.
Well, before we fully understood it, we've used it as a stick to hit people sometimes, and we don't, and those people don't fully
Absolutely,
understand the thing that they want to understand it. But before I've even got, it's a
absolutely,
bit like me going into I've got three puppies. If I went into them and tried to explain this is how we're now going to live in the house, A, they won't
yeah,
fully understand it. And if I turn around and immediately smack them for the thing that they don't fully understand,
yeah.
what behavior do I expect to create?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right on that. And I think that some of it has been about the smacking in terms of your analogy,
Yeah.
but some of it has also been about not really engaging and listening to people's concerns and fears.
Yeah.
And we talk about that as people need more education. Well, no, it's not education. It's genuine engagement, genuine hearing, sharing, discussing, debating. They're the
So
things
right, because
that,
education, again, sorry to interrupt, has a lot of negative connotations. I'm going to
yeah,
talk at you because you're stupid.
yeah,
I'm going to educate you.
yes,
It's a bit like a parenting hierarchical thing, isn't it?
yeah,
I'm going to educate you on this now, Miriam.
yeah, absolutely. It's very much like a parenting thing. Or another an analogy you could use is missionaries, missionaries from one religion going across to other people's cultures and countries
Mm,
and telling them what they should know
yeah.
instead of actually having or what they should believe or what they should feel.
It's like when we try and help out third world countries and we try and impose Western values and we try and give everybody a widescreen TV and we wonder why it doesn't work.
Absolutely, absolutely. The one is not better than the other, and that's an important thing to know. The only exception to that, I think, is when people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing in the sector at the moment is some of those things that have gone on for a long time, some of them overtly, some of them covertly, that people have known about, that people have been discussing for donkey's years. And then as soon as you get a review, what you get is some firefighters and senior officers alike saying, well, that's not the fire and rescue service I recognise. Well, it's the fire and rescue service that some people recognise
Yeah.
because they're not all lying.
No.
So the reality is it needs to shift. So this whole toxic brand thing has taken us away from the actual business case, if I can use that terminology,
Yeah. Yeah.
the business case in terms of our operational performance of having different ways of thinking, of having genuine inclusion, of also genuinely, and this is the professional posh language, isn't it? But reflecting the community that we serve.
Mm,
We trot that out. What does that really mean? Well, what
mm,
it really means is that the people you're doing the service for, you understand because you're them and they're you.
yeah.
Rather than putting ourselves on a pedestal, if you like, because yes, we'll have a different skill set, and yes, we've got a service to deliver, but hasn't every profession?
Yeah. Like we justify it by saying we're saving lives. So that doesn't really apply to
Yeah,
us.
that's right. But you're going to, and I'm sorry to keep going back to the NHS, but that's my
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
kind of bias, I suppose. But you're going to hospital, you don't expect that everybody there is going to be from the same cultural background in
Mm,
terms of people servicing delivering the service. Because the patients going in there are not all from the same cultural background. They're
mm,
just a microcosm of society. Why are we not a microcosm of society?
mm.
Why,
I think
why have we
sometimes
not
we
done that?
say the fire and rescue service says to communities, look, come on in and be yourself. No, not like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we're different and we're special and we're separate to you, and you won't understand us.
Yeah.
And actually, yes, there's like with any profession, there's going to be a huge amount of stuff, a large proportion of elements of things that we do operationally that the vast majority of the population couldn't do. That's accepted. But in every profession, you're going to get that, aren't you?
I think,
So why do we not genuinely sell in all of our debates and discussions across our workforces and with our senior officers the actual benefits to service delivery of thinking differently, of genuinely having a broad range of thoughts? We don't do that. We do equality and inclusion as another task. Not because there's a political drive to do it, not because we genuinely accept or understand or appreciate the real impact that will have in terms of our operational delivery. It will improve it, and that's the bit that we're not kind of sharing.
So let's change gears into some of that, because I think we've done a wonderful job, and we could go back and forth on that for so long, of articulating some of the unknown damages that we're done. And we've seen so much of this come through in the cultural reviews. Now that we've fleshed out and shone a light in some of the landscape that we currently sit within, you do a lot of work with organizations, helping them embed some of the strategic and also tactical and practical applications and changes within their organizational structure of how they can do this. So I'm sure you sit with them all the time on conference calls and consultations or whatever, and they say, look, I agree, Miriam. I agree. I know. We need some help. Come and speak. What do those first I mean, of course, we won't specifically talk about any fire and rescue services in particular, but what do those initial conversations look like? What are the aha moments? What can people actually begin to do?
Generally, they kind of come as two different extremes, if I'm honest, Pete.
Okay.
So I'll either get we want you to come in and we want you to do this, and this. Or and if I'll kind of hold up the mirror and go, well, I can do that, but what outcome are you looking for? Because that won't give you that.
It's a little bit like walking into a car dealership and saying, Miriam, I want the new BMW M5, and go, okay, what is it you were actually trying to do? Well, I want to go on holiday with my family 3 times a year and I want to take my dogs. Oh, okay. So do tell me what you're trying to achieve, and I'll tell you what levers to pull, because actually you're just clutching at straws because you've seen something somewhere else.
That's right. And that again, or you might have always driven a BMW and you might love a BMW, but it isn't what you
they
actually
say if you'd have asked
need.
Henry Ford, what else would they need? They'd have said bigger, stronger horses, wouldn't they? They'd have never said the combustion engine.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean that kind of reflects back on our earlier conversation that quite often what fire and rescue services will do is they'll plan to the nth degree and work out we need all of these tasks doing, and then they'll pull somebody like me in and say do those tasks.
We love a good SWOT analysis, Miriam. It works. Don't change it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or in some organizations, what I get is the absolute other extreme, which is just come in and tell us what we need to do.
Okay.
Come in and tell us what we need to do. The challenge there is that quite often you'll do what you think. I'll do what I think professionally, and I will tell them what I think they need to do. But it can be professionally frustrating for me when they kind of go, yeah, thanks, but no, we're not going to do that.
It really needs to be a combination of the two, doesn't it? Because they know their organization and you know the end goal they're trying to achieve. It has to be a collaborative thing.
That's right. And I don't think I know everything. Nobody knows everything. I'm a proponent of diversity of thought. So when I go into an organization, what I want to do is understand that context. I want to hear from everybody. And then I'll put my professional view in and then give some recommendations. I don't have kind of set recommendations for everybody. But quite often people want you to come in and just, in fire, people will want you to come in and just kind of give them the answers, give them
just wave a magic
the
wand
absolute
and do your
template.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you did that and it didn't make any difference, or you did that, but actually you didn't respond to us in the time that we wanted, or you didn't actually tell us the thing that we wanted you to tell us. Well, okay, if you already knew the answer, why did you need somebody like me to come and help you with that? You know, my job is to facilitate getting to the answers. When I'm working as a consultant, that's my job, is to facilitate getting to the answers. It's not, but sometimes the answers aren't palatable. And in fire, we kind of go, oh, it's not palatable, so we're not doing that.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable truth. I used to do something similar with root cause analysis when we do Kaizen training in companies. I'd go in and facilitate complex problem solving. I didn't know anything about the thing. It was a fast moving consumer goods company, or it was a part of a company or organization or a factory. I didn't know anything about the thing they were doing, but you're facilitating a path of thought, and
That's
you're
right.
almost mediating their own unconscious bias.
Yes, you are. You just, and it's not actually making any difference. It's not actually making any difference. The thing is, if I don't make a difference, if the things that I'm saying are not making a difference, then I don't feel like I'm earning my money. But the problem that I've got, and some of my colleagues have got as well in this professional space, is you tend to feel as if you've been saying the same things over and over and over again. And then the surprise when stories break of, well, actually there's this behavior going on and that behavior going on, and it's kind of like, yeah, we know that, we've been telling you that. We've been telling you that. You know, this is not a surprise to those people who've been on the receiving end of it. This is not a surprise to those firefighters and people from other professional backgrounds working in fire services that are frustrated that the bits of their jobs that they're proud of and they want to do are kind of shrinking, and the bits of their jobs that could actually make a difference are shrinking. But the political elements are the things that are driving it. The institutional elements are the things that are driving it.
You spoke there about the frustrations of people on the receiving end. And again, we're not going to mention the specific services that you've worked with, but you will regularly, because it was part of our conversation before, visit organizations where you make them aware of your physical capability, and they're bringing you in for some consultancy work. And it's almost one of the best examples of the audacity of people just listening but not really hearing what you're saying, and not really setting up an environment to work well with you. If you could give your experiences with that.
Sure, yeah. I mean I have mobility restrictions. I've got a genetic condition, which means I can walk with sticks for short periods of time. I can stand unaided for short periods of time, but the vast majority of the time I need to use a mobility aid, and it's all of my joints. It's not just not just one joint. So my neck will hurt, my hands will hurt. I struggle to get doors open sometimes, that sort of thing. I'm also neurodiverse. I have ADHD, I have dyscalculia, I have dyspraxia. And those things are not easy to deal with. But this whole idea of it's not me that's disabled, it's the world blocking me is one of the key things. So as I'm talking to you now, I'm sitting in a hotel because I'm away working, and they have given me what they've called an accessible room. But the accessible room has a lip at the bottom of the door, which means my chair won't go over it without me kind of hurtling it across, which kind of breaks all my joints. not breaks literally, but shatters, but kind of can't think of the right word.
I know your joints can dislocate quite easily, can't they, as well?
They can, yeah. So you can imagine trying to get a wheelchair over a step, even a small step. It's only kind of a centimetre high, but it means that my joints are jarred, so I'll end up in pain. There's not enough space to turn the wheelchair around. There's the door. But the most important thing is the doors are too heavy to open on your own. So there's a kind of example of how the world I could manage if the door opened.
Yeah.
And we have technology that means doors can open automatically quite easily. But they don't.
It doesn't affect most people, so it's not a consideration.
So it's not consideration. So, and the same is true with neurodiversity. So having ADHD, my brain is wired differently. And people will understand that, they'll hear that, they might empathize with you, they might pity you, they might patronize you, they might think you're some sort of superpowered savant. You know, people will have different perspectives on it. But the reality is, when that starts to impact on how they might function, people stop kind of feeling that empathy or that sympathy. So if you've got ADHD, one of the potential challenges you might have, and it certainly affects me in this way, is what's referred to as time blindness.
Yeah.
So not necessarily understanding in a practical sense how to make sure that you meet deadlines. That can be a real challenge. Now, that shouldn't mean that I, as an ADHD person, should have license to never meet a deadline. No. Because rules are there for a reason. We need structure. We need boundaries. However, when people say, well, the deadline is 2:00, but I actually want it 3 days before, because the way that I think means that I need to read it and absorb it 3 days before, then the deadline has shifted, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So when you already struggle with your organisational kind of thinking around time blindness, to then have two deadlines then gets really difficult to kind of get your brain to function and to work out how much time you'll need, you know, if you sort of backtrack it along to work out how you're going to deliver everything you need to deliver. And when you work in quite a fluid way, in the way that I do, then it can be even more challenging. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make, Pete, is people will nod and go, yeah, we want the benefits of you having ADHD, because the way it presents in me is I think more systemically, I think in a broader sense, I can kind of see gaps where other people miss them. I know that about myself, and people will want those good bits, but not necessarily want to support the parts that I struggle with. And in a practical sense, that could be really difficult.
And also for yourself as well, and because we've had lots of conversations around this. I'm a recovered addict and ADHD and stuff like that. But so I work best when I'm at home, but it has its strengths and its weaknesses. So people won't know I podcast from home. I do so at a standing desk, and I often switch the camera off. A few reasons: A, it white lightens the Wi-Fi, but B, I fidget uncontrollably.
Me
so
too,
it means
mate.
that I can pick things up and I can do things. I have a little wobble board that I stand here on. The benefits of working from home is my distractedness is less because there's not everything going on in the environment that there is in work. The downsides, and this especially showed itself during COVID, I can stand up at my desk at 7 a.m. and then not realize until 6 p.m, and my wife comes and gets me, and I haven't eaten at all during the day, and I haven't done anything else other than work, which is great for your organization, not great for yourself. So I have a little timer next to my desk that goes off after 50 minutes. And it's a prompt for me to go and do something else. Otherwise, I will just stand here and churn it out constantly. So strengths and weaknesses. But if someone said to me, well, no, work to me looks like you, and obviously if I'm delivering a course, then I'm at work, but it's like, you must sit at that desk, just there. Sit there, because that shows me you're a good employee. Yeah, but I'm going to be so inefficient sat here. I'm really going to struggle. I'm not going to get a lot done. It's going to make me look stupid. It's going to make me look lazy. It's going to make me look inefficient, because I can't work very well like that. I really do want to do the thing you're asking me to do, but you're forcing me into a box that doesn't suit me.
Absolutely. And instead of being outcome driven in terms of
that's what I miss most about my last organization. We did ROW, which was results only work environment. And you only had to attend one meeting every 2 weeks, and I'd go to different sites and do all the problem solving stuff that we're spoken about. But it was about it, and that's ultimately what you're employing someone for. You want the outcome. You want the thing doing. I don't care how you do it. Stop being so controlling over how someone does it. As long as they're not doing anything illegal and they're not completely taking the mickey, let them do it how they want to do it.
Well, what does completely taking the mickey mean?
And that's a great point. I can get done in 2 hours what it will take someone else 8 hours to do at work. That's not because I'm better than them. It's because I'm a flipping addict and I will just churn at it and I will seem very rude to anybody around me because I will just smash that with cognitive horsepower. But if I then want to take the next 6 hours doing whatever the hell I want to do, I've got the thing done.
Yep, absolutely. And the flip side of it, and one of the ways my ADHD impacts on me is trying to get to a point where I can actually sit down and focus. So I'll kind of want to make sure I'm comfortable. I'll want to make sure I've got my drink. I'll make sure I've got my phone. I've got everything set up the way that I want it. And then I still might not be able to focus. But then maybe, and it's different on different days, maybe at 10 o'clock that night, I'll suddenly get kind of an inkling, an urge, a thought process. And then I'll sit and I'll work for 12 hours straight.
I've found putting a notepad next to my bed has mitigated that a little bit because it allows me to wake up when I have those surges and I just take lots of notes and write things down because otherwise my mind won't let me settle because it thinks I'm not going to do the thing.
See, I'd lose the notes. so for me, I have to do it when it's in my brain. I have to actually do it when it's in my brain.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't work when you're in an environment where you're pinned down to timeframes, does it?
No.
And when I say timeframes, I don't mean essential timeframes. I'm talking about where somebody just says, "Well, actually, I've decided I'm meeting with X person on Friday, so therefore I need that from you by then." But actually, I don't need it by Friday. I need it by Tuesday, so that I've got time to think about it. Which means you've got to have it done for Friday. Just in case there's a technological problem, and and when your brain doesn't function in that way, that can be really challenging. But then the really good outputs are what I produce is often very, very high quality.
I want to ask for a minute because again, you've mentioned a few things there, and I'd be remiss because it happens sometimes when I get deep into a conversation with someone that we skip over things that sometimes other people won't be fully cognizant of. Now, you mentioned things like dyspraxia, dyscalculia. These are neurodiversities that are becoming much more prevalent and will have a tremendous effect on our ability to recruit and help develop great people within the organizations. So I know I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, which is identify some of the common neurodiversities, but things that people that are drawn to this sector as kinesthetic learners perhaps do exhibit some of these common trends, which is again a bit of a tarring of a brush. But could you please unfold a little bit of what they are?
Okay, so neurodiversity it's a term that's been around for about the last 25 years, and it basically refers to, and there's lots of debates about which conditions belong in the neurodiverse circle and what doesn't. But actually, all of these conditions, for want of a better word, all of these diagnosable conditions have a lot of crossovers, and they have a lot of positive points as well as a lot of challenges and things that you might struggle with because of the way the world is set up.
Yeah.
So dyscalculate. So most people will have heard of dyslexia, which is where you can get people of varying intellect. So you can get really highly intelligent people with dyslexia. You can get people with average intelligence with dyslexia in the same way as you can with anyone else. So it's not about intellect.
That's what we think of it, though, because the standard education system, if you can't read and write, you're stupid. And that's kind of, that was the backing soundtrack, wasn't it?
That's right. So dyslexia is quite commonly known of. And people tend to think, well, that just means that somebody struggles with spelling or reading and writing. And actually, dyslexia is much more complicated than that. It has impacts in terms of the way that you organize yourself, the way that you see, the way that your eyes work and what you can look at and what you can't. It has really profound effects on, because your brain is wired differently. So people just see it as that one output. Reading and writing is an issue. It's not just that.
That's just a way that it manifests because it's something that we measure very regularly.
Absolutely. With dyscalculia, it's a very, very similar thing, but with mathematical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the way that manifests in me is I can have very kind of highly intellectual conversations about data trends, and I can understand that systemic thinking, but ask me to add 7 and 6 and I have to count it on my fingers. Now, if somebody sees you having to count that on your fingers, and they think you're an idiot, they think you're stupid, and they think, how can that person possibly have the skills to do the kind of work that I do? But actually, it's a minuscule element of being able to add 7 and 6. Does it matter that I can't do that in reality, in terms of the impact on my work? For dyspraxia, that's a challenge about where your brain sees your body in the space that it occupies. So people often think that it's just about clumsiness, and that is often how it manifests. But you might, constantly bump into things, and your spatial awareness is slightly out.
Yeah, they call it the developmental coordination disorder, don't they? It's a common disorder that affects movement and coordination.
That's right. So, and ADHD is the worst named condition in the world, because it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that actually is not what it is at all. Quite often people with ADHD are quite languid people who don't charge around, but their brains might be racing. So you might be hyperactive in your brain, but not necessarily in your body. And actually, it's not a deficit of attention. It's actually too much attention. And where do you put it? So it's really difficult to focus, and you'll procrastinate doing things because you're trying to focus on too many things. And another element of ADHD is this thing that we refer to as hyperfocus, which is what I was just describing, that when your brain gets into gear, you can forget, and you were describing it, you can forget time, and you just keep going. You might forget to go to the loo or eat or anything. So there's actually too much focus, and it's actually being able to harness the focus and put it where you want it within the timeframes that the rest of the world wants it, to be able to do stuff. So there's some of them. There are a number of other conditions. So most people will have heard of autism, the autism spectrum. Interesting idea. People think about that as if it's a linear line with high functioning, and this terminology is
like
now
there's a good end and a bad end or something.
Like there's a good end and a bad end. So the whole idea of spiky profiles is quite an interesting one, where if you think of it almost like a color wheel, with the different kind of skills or deficits that somebody might have. One autistic person might have a really high spike in one of those areas and a really low spike in another. So they might appear to be high functioning in society's words, but actually underneath there's a particular deficit that they're really struggling with. And then you get into this idea of masking, because like for me, it's taken me until I'm not going to tell you my age, but it's taken me until slightly later in life to actually stop masking the dyscalculia, because it is such a negative thing to not be good at maths. Or it's one of those jokey things, oh well, maths, nobody's good at maths, are they? Everybody hates maths. But when you actually can't add 6 and 7 without counting on your fingers, I still cannot remember what 6 add 7 is. When I count it up, I go, of course it's that. Why won't that stay in my brain? Whereas for other people, it's automatic.
Yeah.
So I used to mask that a lot. I didn't used to tell people that was a problem, because I could understand broader mathematical principles. So then when somebody actually sees you struggling with that, then it then becomes quite a negative thing. So in order to progress my career, I didn't tell people I couldn't add up. How on earth, you're not going to go into an environment where you're trying to command professional respect and say, I can't add up, are you? So neurodiversity is a fascinating thing. So the spiky profiles of people having real strengths in one area and real deficits in others is quite important, because one autistic person or one person with ADHD compared to another might present very, very differently, because their spiky profile might be different. I have a view that actually all of the neurodiversities cross over with one another, because there's already genetic evidence that shows that it's likely to run in families.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I'm extremely good with the written word, extremely good, and English grammar is one of my major strengths. My sister is profoundly dyslexic to the point where she struggles to write at all or to read. Yet she can add up and I can't. So those kind of genetic links are not properly understood. The kind of high strength elements are also not properly understood, because actually we've focused on it as the deficits because of the way the world is structured, so people need adjustments. But actually the strengths are not really kind of understood either, of the benefits that you can give. So you'll have come across it in your training experience, I'm sure, that somebody who appears to have massive potential but doesn't seem able to kind of apply it.
Yeah.
And quite often that is a kind of type of neurodiversity where somebody has massive strengths, but the environment is not allowing them, or the deficits that they have that they might not even be aware of, or they might be masking, is stopping them from reaching that potential. So that cycle of those different neurodiverse conditions, the potential that society is missing out on, and that the fire service is missing out on, because we'll look at people through one lens. Well, you've got to be able to do that, and that in order to be good at X over here. Instead of going, well, actually, that person is really good at that, but they're really not good at that.
I think we miss out on so much top talent. We end up forcing people into the private sector, sometimes into the entrepreneurial space, where they can set up their own environment and their own, work-life balance and truly excel. And then we come back inside our hub and go, why can't we attract top talent to the public sector? And we can at times, is evident by some of the wonderful guests I feel privileged to have on, yourself included. So there is evidence that people are still hanging around here, but I think we're leaving so much on the table by these sacred cows, to echo back to the beginning of our conversation, that we dare not sacrifice at the altar of tradition.
That's right. Absolutely agree. So just to finish off the disability point,
yes,
I think what you were referring to when you first asked me to share this was when I first start working with fire and rescue services, I will share with them quite explicitly that I have profound physical disabilities, and it means that, for example, I need to travel first class on the trains, because if I don't, I haven't got enough room for my either for my wheelchair, or if I can transfer into an ordinary chair, it will just destroy my joints if I'm on a long train journey.
Yeah.
But what I do to mitigate that, because it's taxpayers' money when we're talking about public sector, is I pay for my own disabled person's rail card, which takes the cost down to 2/3. And so that the one mitigates the other. So it doesn't actually cost any more money for each fire and rescue service. The number of times fire and rescue services have said, well, we can't pay for first class. Well, okay, I'm not asking you to pay for it. I'm asking you to book it.
Yes.
And then to authorize it, because what I've said is I'm paying for my disabled person's rail card.
Yeah.
So that will take it down by 1/3. And then often they'll kind of say, oh, well, yeah, we understand that we need to support you with transportation around our different environments, but then they'll not organise that. And then I'll end up stranded.
That's the big one. And in total transparency, again, we won't say where you're working, but you're sat somewhere at the moment because it was failed to be recognized and implemented and planned for. So you're unable to deliver the thing because there's just an irony and hypocrisy into the challenge that sits within the thing they've asked you to do. And they just expect you to turn up as a fully functioning white woman and give us advice on how to treat people better.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, as we speak, I'm sitting in a hotel room because no one actually organised to have me picked up, and there aren't taxis locally in the place where I am.
No.
That would take my wheelchair.
Yeah.
So I'm literally stranded in a hotel. So I might as well stay at home.
Miriam, I've absolutely loved we've been speaking for over an hour and a half there. I love it. We've been going so many. Yeah, I know. Before we go, I mean, I'd be remiss. I mean, the best place for people to find you, I think, is LinkedIn, and we're going to put a link to your bio in the notes for this. Is there any closing requests or thought-provoking insights that perhaps you would like to ask of the listener? And if they do wish to reach out for some more guidance, support, or advice in your professional capacity, what would you leave them with, and what's the best way for people to speak with you?
I think, what would I leave them with? I would say, don't make assumptions about people based on your own knowledge and experience. Actually try and genuinely keep an open mind and have open conversations with people, because that is genuinely the way that you'll get the best from individuals. How people can get hold of me? Yes, you're right. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. You can contact me through the NFCC as well. They have my contact details, and also through Women in the Fire Service UK, as I'm one of the directors there.
Yes, sorry, we're remiss to speak more about that. It's always great, and this is like a really, really unsurprising example that I tend to meet some of the most incredible men and women at events like WFS, because it tends to attract the more open-minded, like-minded individuals.
People who are less concerned about how people might perceive them.
Miriam, I've found that so invaluable and so insightful. I know a lot of this we've spoken about before, but it's a real privilege to be able to create. I always think of these as audible time capsules, something that we can bury in the internet that hopefully people will continue to discover, because people obviously listen to it as soon as it comes out. But we have episodes from 3 years ago that still get brand new listens every single day. And it's been a real privilege, because I think the work that you're doing necessary right now. And I feel like people such as yourself have been screaming into the void for a very long time now. And
that's a good way of describing it, actually.
Yeah. And now people have been going, oh, God, you see the monster coming over the hill? I'll tell you what, let's go and find that person that was screaming into the darkness out in the car park and ask them their professional opinion, because it sounds as though they were making a bit of sense.
It's always a delight to speak to you, Pete, because you are probably one of the most open-minded people that I've met, and you are prepared to have these discussions and be open about our thinking and challenge and say we can all be wrong.
Thank you. My hope is that we always do courses and say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I hope to be the physical embodiment of that, because I come onto podcast episodes and ask stupid questions all the time. And sometimes my guests will go, oh, I thought you'd already known that, Pete. And you know what? My hope is that at least people will take away that I'm not a professional. I don't know what I'm doing. We're all out here.
That's not true, Pete. That is not true. You are a professional firefighter. You are a professional trainer, and you're a very, very intellectually savvy and emotionally intelligent person.
Don't tell too many people, because I'm getting away with it so far. Miriam, thank you so much, my love. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our drive and purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests. And as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.